Alex Bethal is the executive chairman and managing partner at Revitate, and he's also his family is the co-owner of the NBA franchise, the Sacramento Kings. They have done a lot of development in opportunity zones and have had Senator Tim Scott out to one or two ribbon cuttings within the last couple of years, I believe. So, Alex, we're happy to have you here with us today. Alex Bethal speak on this topic of the new Congress and opportunity zones. And Brett Siglin he's in Phoenix now, but he spent some time practicing law in Washington, D.C. So I thought let's bring Brett in too. He's a partner at Jennings Strauss law firm in Phoenix, Arizona, and that firm, and Brett in particular, has a lot of expertise with opportunity zones. So Brett, welcome to you as well. I touched on the high-level overview of the opportunity zone reform legislation as best I can. I kind of want to talk about that reform legislation, get your thoughts on it from both of you, and also discuss maybe other things on the table for opportunity zones in 2023 and beyond, how the policy may change. I was hoping that we would know the outcome of the midterm election by the time we got on stage here for this panel this afternoon, gentlemen, but and we've got a pretty good idea now. We didn't see a red wave. We don't have a clear takeover of both houses of Congress by the Republicans, but it looks like we will have a Democrat-led Senate. We'll probably know with more certainty in the next few days here. Maybe it won't be until December 6th after the Georgia runoff. And it also looks like we are going to have, most likely, still up in the air, the Republicans retake the House. But let me turn to you first, Alex. What do you expect from the outcome of the election? What are your thoughts on it, and how might the makeup of Congress in the next session starting in January affect opportunity zone policy?
Thanks, Jimmy. It's a great question, and I think the results of the election are emblematic of the even division that we have in today's political environment, and that there's no major swings one way or the other. It would be great if there was clarity at this point. That said, I agree with you. It seems like at least one of the houses of Congress are most likely going to change, and therefore we'll be in an era of divided government. And in an era of divided government, the window of legislative actions becomes narrower because, by definition, both sides or a bipartisan consensus is going to be really important to get something passed through the House, the Senate, and finally the White House and the administration. So therefore, programs like the Opportunity Zone legislation do rise up in importance because it is bipartisan, it's bicameral since its very beginnings. And we do believe that those bipartisan, bicameral roots are going to shine through, not just in this lame duck session, but in the years to come, as the more one-sided legislative acts become less likely to get passed.
And Brett, let me turn to you now. Let's get your thoughts on the midterm. Were you surprised by the results or lack thereof, and how might that outcome impact opportunity zones going forward, either in the lame duck session here or in 2023?
Yeah, thanks, Jimmy. Again, great to be a part of this here today. Yeah, I'd say I'm most surprised by the lack of results. I've been kind of poring over the results starting last night and this morning, kind of in preparation. And like you said, I think there's a pretty good shot here that the Republicans will take control of the House, and it looks like the Democrats are going to maintain the Senate. I think what's important to maybe point out is that, as far as I can tell so far, all the sponsors and co-sponsors survived. So, when the Opportunity Zones Transparency Extension Act was introduced back in the spring in each of the House and the Senate, I think everybody survived. Either they weren't running, as a senator. I know Tim Scott won handily. Cory Booker is still safe. Mark Warner, Chris Van Hollen, Todd Young, I think they all are still, on board in the Senate. And then, the only change that I saw, I think Ron Kind of Wisconsin decided not to run. So, he'll be here, for the next few months, but I'm wondering if maybe that'll give us a shot of getting this through in the next 2 months. I mean, nobody has a crystal ball, right? But I think you've touched on this with others throughout the day and in preceding conferences, and it's certainly at the Opportunity Zone Expo. We were on a panel together last month. Nobody really knows whether this is going to squeak through in this lame duck session, but I'd like to think there's still maybe a chance here, especially knowing Ron Kind is going to kind of bow out. Maybe maybe he can do something to make a move before the House turns over.
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of the supporters of Opportunity Zones are still around, but possibly one of its biggest detractors is Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon. He's chair of the Senate Finance Committee, and he's been very critical of Opportunity Zones and has ruffled a lot of feathers about it, sending out letters demanding responses from a handful of qualified opportunity funds earlier this year. And he did win re-election in Oregon last night. I don't know if that might impact anything or not, but I just wanted to point that out, that we still have Senator Wyden to, I wouldn't say contend with, but maybe we can soften his view of Opportunity Zones. Alex, what are your thoughts on what the industry needs and how we could talk with senators and congressmen and congresswomen who may not love Opportunity Zones the same way that a Senator Cory Booker or a Senator Tim Scott may appreciate it, and certainly like the members of our community here today. What can we do to change the minds or influence policy going forward as an industry?
Well, specifically, I think communicating with policymakers and politicians and letting the voice be heard. I think that's number one in government 101 is elected leaders are beholden to their constituencies. So to the extent that they hear from people in their districts and people in their states in support of this initiative, then that does make an impact, because they are inherently by necessity responsive to their constituents. More broadly than that, I think the good news and the good stories that are coming out of Opportunity Zones and the actual work that's being done on the ground is really meaningful, and it's really important. It took a little while for this incentive to be utilized due to the regulations being written and then being implemented, and by the nature of this program, it's geared towards development. So there's a natural lag in terms of seeing tangible results. But now we're at the stage, you mentioned Senator Scott came out for ribbon cutting for one of our projects. We now have 3 projects that have completed. We're not the only ones. We started early in the space, but there are many other fund managers and developers who have projects that are coming online, and it's becoming very tangible for all stakeholders to see the economic and the social impact that these developments and these projects can have in a community, and the jobs that get created, and increase in Wi-Fi and broadband and parks and all the advantages that come with proper urban development or proper development in lower income areas. That is getting the notice of the media in some cases, the local politicians, especially at the municipal level. Investors have shown a tremendous receptivity to this program. So it's that grassroots storytelling, and you do a great job on your podcast, Jimmy, of getting the word out about the benefits of Opportunity Zones, where it's not just a great tax incentive for investors, but it's actually doing the intention of the program, which is bringing private capital to historically lower income areas and creating impact.
Brett, I don't know if you have anything else to add there. Alex did a great job answering that question, but anything else that the industry can do to kind of help its own cause and advance the Opportunity Zone policy?
Absolutely. No, I mean, I know you had John Schiaretti on earlier from Novogradac. They've certainly done a phenomenal job over the last 3 years, lobbying, getting the word out, kind of keeping people informed, working with Treasury. There's certainly others out there doing that. I think the more of us that stay active, especially in the coming months, the better. I'm still hopeful. That this was always a bipartisan concept from the outset, and the same people that kind of kicked this into gear 4 years ago. They're still around. They're still sponsoring. We've built up a lot of, I think, good rapport in the early Biden years here. There's certainly less negative messaging out there than there was, say, 2 years ago. And you're right about Senator Wyden, but I think his message is toned down significantly, I think, this year too. So I maybe the biggest challenge is it's just not getting enough attention. Certainly, from the Biden administration. I mean, obviously, there's lots of other priorities right now, and this is kind of a small piece of a huge puzzle. But I think the more the message gets out is a positive message. I think we've got pretty high hopes, even if it doesn't pass through this this next few months. Ideally, it'll happen early in 23. I've heard that Republicans, if they control the House, maybe they want us to be their bill next year, or maybe they want to just get this out of the way and start clean, hopefully in 2023.
Yeah, it's interesting. We really haven't heard anything from the federal government, the administration in particular, I should say, the White House, about opportunity zones since Biden took office back in January of what year was that? January of 21, almost 2 years ago.
Almost 2 years.
But it's interesting to note that 2.5 years ago, we weren't sure who the Democrat nomination for president was going to be. And I was worried, and I was telling people, hey, what if Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren win the candidacy for the Democrats and ends up advancing to the White House? We could be in danger of possibly unwinding the entire TCJA, and maybe opportunity zones go by the wayside entirely as well. So the fact that Joe Biden, a little bit more moderate, advanced to the White House eventually 2 years ago, and he basically, his office has been silent on opportunity zones since he won election 2 years ago. I think maybe that's been good news, although I'd kind of like to see some sort of advancement of the program come about. So that's why we're talking about, at least we do have this reform legislation that's been advanced in the House and the Senate, introduced bicamerally back in April by both chambers and sponsored by the same co-sponsors that co-sponsored the original Investing in Opportunity Act way back when, that eventually became packaged as part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that led to opportunity zones. I want to ask both of you, what are your overall impressions and thoughts of the OZ reform legislation? And do you wish it had anything more or less, or what are some of your hopes for it if it gets redrafted potentially? Alec, we'll start with you.
Well, definitely, we're very supportive of the pending legislation, and are cautiously optimistic that it will receive a vote before the end of the year. The provisions in it are fund-friendly, investor-friendly, and also are reforming some of the criticisms with the high income zones, as you mentioned, the sunsetting of those, the reporting requirements, which were always supposed to be part of the legislation, but got stripped out due to the reconciliation process in which the original law was passed. So it's kind of bringing back some of the original intent. So we see this as a modest reform effort, something that both sides have a lot to like. And are confident that it's another milestone, if it were to be passed, that cements the opportunity zone legislation as part of our tax code that is resilient across administrations, across parties, across time, and really just the first step of what we believe could be a more expansive bill in future Congresses. And in some of those areas, we'd like to see this tool be utilized for operating businesses. That's something that people have done, but there have been some obstacles and restrictions that have prevented the ability for operating businesses to take advantage of this incentive. And there's some really smart ideas on how to create better alignment for that category of business, and also a focus on areas of deeper need. So there's 8,700 opportunity zones across the country. They come in all shapes and sizes based on income. They range from deep poverty to areas that are already experiencing economic revitalization. And we think this tool can be used as an important lever in addressing some of the areas of deepest poverty. So most of those Z dollars have been allocated to probably the middle income and above within the OZ bound. And if there can be greater enhancements that help facilitate development in the lowest income areas, we think that could be beneficial for all stakeholders involved.
That's great. Well, I want to get back to you on that and get some more specific thoughts, drill into that a little bit more in a minute. But I want to turn to Brett now and get his take. Brett, what's your impression of the opportunity zone reform legislation that's that hit the floor back in April? And if it gets changed at all, I mean, what's on your wish list to how to improve it?
Yeah, like most people, I think it's generally positive. I think, the timing now is especially good. We talked about this before, Jimmy, that, there's usually an uptick in activity towards the end of the year. And ideally, if this could get extended here in the next few months, that might help us with, increased activity in the fourth quarter. I think it's great that, we get the, investors would get that extended deferral period. It even relates back to those that would have invested in 2021 and keep the 15% step up for 6 years. And then, of course, anybody that gets in by the end of next year, we get the 10% step up. All positive for really, everybody across the board. I also think, it's pretty obvious there needs to be some reporting component. People have been talking about this for 4 years. It really should have been part of the initial legislation and was left out for whatever reason. But I would just say, one warning, we've talked about before too, at the Phoenix Oz Expo, there's been a lot of mistakes made in filing, both on behalf of funds and on behalf of investors. And there's been quite a lot of activity with the Treasury sending out letters to QOFs that, filed their returns incorrectly, say for the 2019, 2020 year. I am concerned about what those reporting requirements will do, especially to the smaller sponsors out there that maybe aren't as don't have the most sophisticated CPAs. They're more likely to make mistakes. I think there probably is consensus that this could consolidate the industry somewhat because the uptick in keeping track of those filings, that filing the 8996 properly is going to be more of a burden, I think, if this legislation passes. So that's one thing. And then the penalties too are pretty severe. So those who fail to file correctly could be subject to daily penalties of $500. I think it could go up to 50,000 depending on the size of your fund. So it's really nothing to shake your hand at. I mean, it's going to be serious if these reporting requirements, the way they were set forth in the initial legislation, are enacted. I think the other thing that concerns me though too is the early sunset for some of these high income census tracts. I mean, whether we like it or not, a lot of investment has been in some like the very most desirable of the 8,700 plus opportunity zones. And I'm concerned about the political backlash that could create in the upcoming year or two, or even lawsuits. And it's also going to create opportunities for governors and their staff and others at the local level to designate new zones. But that's going to be an inherently political process too, as it always is. So I think that's something to kind of be forewarned about.
No, for sure. And Brett, a lot of the thoughts you just shared, you shared with me a short while ago when we recorded our episode of the Opportunity Zones podcast, which hasn't aired yet, but it's going to air sometime in the next few weeks. So be on the lookout for that. I really appreciate your thoughts here today as well, Brett. Wanted to talk about, the thought of this reform legislation maybe being the first step in getting this opportunity zone policy extended permanently at some point. Do you think that's possibly on the table, and what else might be in a version 2.0 of opportunity zones if we are looking at a post reform legislation passing period of a new Congress in 23 and 24. What else might be on the table for opportunity zones going forward? Best case scenario, let's say that the legislation does get passed before the end of the year. Alex, I'll let you go.
Well, I wish I had the ability to wave the magic wand and write the law the way that I would want. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. And we do have two parties and two Congresses and a really important think tank in EIG, actually, who's spending a lot of time and has provided leadership on this issue since the very beginning. So I think it's going to take into consideration all of the stakeholders, whether they be the municipal level, the state level, obviously the investors and fund managers, and then the lawmakers in Washington, D.C. And there'll be a tug of war. I kind of previewed some of the areas that I think will be important in Opportunity Zones 2.0, being improving the incentive as a tool for operating businesses, improving the tool to focus on the communities most in need. I do think that having more conformity around the country, where there's a variety of conforming measures within the states, if there can be, and that is our federal system, so each state has its own right to conform in their own way within their respective tax codes. Some states like California have chosen not to conform at all, which, given that the state of California is the largest opportunity zone, has produced the most amount of capital for opportunities on investment, and also received a fair amount as well. We certainly see the opportunity to enhance that activity, enhance the size of OZ dollars in the universe if California were to pursue some form of conformity, even a limited conformity. So those are some of the things that are top of mind, but with more time and a couple of years to work on it, I can come back here and give you some more detailed thoughts.
Well, that'd be great. That'd be tremendous if we can get you back on in a year or so to give us an update there. Brett, I don't know if you had any thoughts on that question or not.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the most important thing would be to maybe have some flexibility on those penalties for failure to report, especially if it's not intentional. Maybe give some more guidance on how to file the 8997 properly. And I guess the other things that comes to mind, Treasury has been extremely flexible from the outset with giving sponsors more time, especially the working capital safe harbor comes to mind. We've been talking a lot about that recently. Maybe additional flexibility there in the coming years, especially as difficult as it is now to raise capital. I mean, things have really changed, and maybe finding there's some great relief during COVID that was passed, and maybe something like that in the coming months in light of the sort of the pending recession we're in.
All right, excellent. Well, let's get to some Q&A to move on with the questions here now. Let's see. I've got. I'll address this one to Brett. I haven't heard much about the Dynamism Fund. Could you provide a summary of the expected impact of this piece of the legislation? What do you know about the Community Dynamism Fund, Brett?
Yeah, it's $1 billion for state and community to assist state and local governments with technical assistance, capacity building, and financing support. I appreciate the question because I think you're right. Nobody's really talking about it, but it's a great way to potentially serve underserved communities and provide ability for projects in some low-income areas to get additional funding.
Alex, maybe you can answer this next one here. For the governors who are going to lose some opportunity zones, they'll get the opportunity to nominate replacement OZs. What advice or suggestions would you offer to those governors?
To the governors, a great question. It's going to be difficult to avoid politics, I think, in that. And governors in their duties should really look at the needs of the communities versus the needs of their donors.
Excellent. Let's see here. Brett, this one's for you. You mentioned a minute ago lawsuits that might occur from the backlash. What kind of lawsuits were you hinting at there exactly?
Yeah, I hate to open the door to that, but I think anyone who's affected by an early sunset would certainly be pretty vocal about it. I mean, the good news is there is this new category for pre-existing trader business. So if I'm a sponsor and I'm actively engaged and participating in a qualified opportunity fund or QOZB that's in one of these designated tracks, then as long as I've spent $250,000 or I've put forth some sort of private placement offering or registered with the SEC, then I'll have a pretty good shot. And one could even argue that those that got in early will have a huge competitive advantage in those really hot census tracks. But I'd be concerned about those others, developers and others out there that are getting pinched out, say somewhere in Silicon Valley or Long Beach or some of these really hot markets that are kind of, there's been a lot of changes since 2010 when the data was collected, and we're going off the 2020 census tract data now. I think there's also potential for I don't know about lawsuits, but maybe just backlash at the local level, knowing how this process may play out in designating new zones.
Good answer there. Two more questions and then we'll cut you guys loose. We got another 60 to 90 seconds here. This question is a little bit pessimistic. I think it comes from somebody who's been disappointed at the election result. It sounds like this person says, it seems like this election result might embolden Democrats in Congress to push back on anything that even hints at a tax break for the wealthy. Is there a chance that Democrat overperformance in the midterms last night has tanked any potential OZ extension? That's a tough one. Alex, I'll let you take that one.
Thanks, Jimmy. Appreciate that. No softball. I think it's too early to tell. There is going to be different leverage points and different biases in the horse trading between now and the end of the year. And the fact of the matter is, we do believe that Congress is going to change hands. So therefore, if the Democrats in the in the House want to have a say in what the extension looks like, this is still their best chance in having a voice on and an input into it. So we'll see.
All right. Last 30 seconds. Need a quick answer from both of you. What percentage chance do you give the legislation of going through? We'll say before the end of this year. That wasn't part of the question, but I'll put a time parameter on it. For the end of this year. Alex, you go first.
It was 65 as of yesterday. Now it's probably 58.
All right. And Brett?
I'm going to say something closer to 45.
All right. I'm going 65. I'm the most optimistic one here. So that's great. Gentlemen, been a pleasure speaking with both of you today. Alex and Brett, thank you so much. And we're going to move along with the program, but appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you, Brett.
Thank you, Jim.
And and Alex, have fun. Enjoy your event later this evening. Good luck out there.
Oh, great. Appreciate it. Thank you. We're having our Social Impact Summit this afternoon.
Fantastic. Good luck out there.